Welcome to the Humankindness at Work podcast, where you'll hear inspiring stories of people just like you making a difference in their corner of the world. You'll hear how human kindness is at work and how you can be a part of it. I'm Jennifer Clark. Ready to be inspired? Here we go. Welcome to the very first episode of the Humankindness at Work podcast. I am so excited to share my guests with you today. My husband and I have known them for over 20 years, and this couple has been making a difference in their corner of the world for as long as we've known them. Dustin and Christina Hite are co-founders of A Faithful Presence, a nonprofit organization in Austin, Texas that focuses on building safety and trust among the 400 residents who are recovering from chronic homelessness within the Community First Village. Dustin earned his master's in divinity, is an ordained minister, and a certified spiritual director. He is also a middle child. Shout out to all those middle children in the world, a peacemaker, and a pickleball lover. Christina is also an ordained minister. She's earned 2 master's degrees, one in counseling, specializing in marriage and family therapy, and a master's in divinity. She's an oldest child. Birth order matters, people. She is an improver and a highly competitive board gamer. They really are 2 of the most genuine and selfless people that I know, and I'm sure you'll enjoy our conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Dustin and Christina.
Thanks so much for having us.
Excited to be here.
So glad to have you. On this podcast, we are jumping into the good stuff right away. We're going to fast forward a little bit, but really quick, I think you have an anniversary around now. Is my memory
Coming up in January?
Okay. That's exciting. How many years is this?
18.
Wow. I remember that cold day. I remember it. I remember standing up. I wasn't like in your bridal party, but I remember doing something with your wedding dress or your veil. It was so cold. I have a very vivid memory of that.
It was a wedding in Illinois in January.
Yeah.
It made sense for our school schedule, but at least there was no snow. You know, it could have been worse. But
Could have been worse. Always. Midwest weather always could be worse.
Yep.
All right. Well, you guys, let's jump into part of your story that really changed your life. It was August of 2020, in the middle of a pandemic crisis. You decide to move your family. You have 2 girls. You decide to move your whole family from Illinois to Austin, Texas. And not only that, but you moved into a tiny home surrounded by strangers coming out of homelessness. Why in the world did you do that? Tell us about where you live now and why you're there.
yeah. So when you put it like that, it does sound a little wild.
Yeah, I almost said, do you know? No.
So we live in a tiny home community that is the first of its kind here in Austin, and it's called Community First Village. We stumbled upon it actually in May of 2019 when we were visiting Austin for a different reason and were invited to take a tour of this one-of-a-kind place. We walked around led by one of the neighbors here who was a fabulous tour guide. And after 2.5 hours of exploring these tiny homes and all the beautiful services and resources they had for folks coming out of chronic homelessness, we were just like, whoa, what did we just experience? So yeah, kind of in that moment, I knew something shifted for me, and I thought, I'd better ask Dustin what he's thinking. Like, we were not expecting to come to Austin and have our lives kind of rocked. But we had experience serving people who were unhoused at our previous church where we pastored, and so it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that we would continue to serve in this capacity. But we did not have a move in mind. And so I asked Dustin, we got back to the rental car after our 2.5 hour tour, and I asked Dustin, what'd you think? And he thought, oh, maybe we'll bring this model back to Peoria, Illinois, where we were living. We'll do it there. Maybe somehow we could help the very smaller unhoused population there. And I said, I think we should move here. This is May of 2019. And he didn't look at me like I was completely off my rocker. And so we continued the conversation. And basically within 24 hours, we kind of decided that this made sense for our family to pursue the possibility of living alongside folks who've suffered such great trauma and isolation. So yeah, that's kind of how we ended up here in August of 2020. The process really began about a year prior.
Yeah, it was a wild shift, but it felt right. And I think that was also a further confirmation that it was like, it didn't make sense, but we were being drawn toward it. So
We're really drawn to places where, being pastors, where ministry doesn't feel like what you might think of as ministry, where it feels um, it feels very natural. And this is not necessarily from a pulpit where you're speaking, but it's very much this idea of living in solidarity with people. We've done that in pockets throughout our life. We were foster parents of how our girls came into our home. And so widening the circle of family and really extending that to the people that we live alongside was always something kind of on our mind. And then we saw it in action. At the time, the community was about 200 people. So we've really, really doubled in size. But we could picture it. We could picture waking up and drinking our coffee on the porch and knowing our neighbors and being able to, offer things to them, but also receive from them. It just seemed like it would fit who we are and how we like to live. So we didn't know about the tiny home thing, but we could also picture that. It's 399 square feet where we are. So it's actually one of the bigger size model. There's actually smaller homes than that, micro homes where folks have an even smaller space. But ours is definitely, pushing it for 4 people. But it works. You realize how much more simply you can live. And it's not fancy around here. We don't need as many clothes. We spend a lot of our time just casually hanging out with folks. And yeah, it works.
Can you tell us a little bit,
Yeah.
like, what does your day-to-day look like? What does human kindness at work look like every day to you?
yeah, there's an expectation of just building relationships and neighboring. And like, I've compared it to Stars Hollow before from Gilmore Girls, where you
Love that
you
show.
walk out and like all these people are here with all their quirks, and you know, there is some idealism, that doesn't fit reality always. People are dealing with their own issues, where they're maybe it's addiction or mental illness, or just like the chaos and the stress of poverty and recovering from all their traumas. And so it's a little, honestly, it's kind of delightful, like all the idiosyncrasies that we get to be part of. But there are events happening, a lot of meals, like at least once a day, there's some kind of communal meal or donuts and coffee that are offered. Or we play pickleball. We watch movies or sports events together, or just like live our lives together. So for us who, um, have more resources, more time, so we often will give rides to people or help them get to the grocery store, medical appointments or probation appointments, or go to the Social Security office, or help them access food stamps, things that really people might lean on if they had family. But for our neighbors who are so isolated from a supportive network, there's no one they can turn to. And so they fall through the cracks of the systems. And so we step into that space, and it sometimes is just offering a listening ear and having coffee, or just like, hey, you want some Gatorade? Like, our porch is always open. People know that. Or kind of going deep and spending 3.5 hours to get their Social Security turned on. And then it's like, that has a huge impact in their quality of life.
You're filling in those gaps, right? Where the system is failing or their family is not present. You step in and fill those gaps. That's so beautiful and so necessary. I mean, when you think about your own life, when you are in a healthy situation, how many people are involved in your own personal success? There's tons. But if you're not in a position to have that community, then you need people like you. You guys talk about, you use the phrase neighboring well in your newsletter, on social media. And if you're listening and you don't follow them, highly recommend following A Faithful Presence on Instagram or jumping into their newsletter. You talk about neighboring well. Can you unpack that? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, the idea of being a good neighbor, I guess for us, it could be for anyone. It just means looking out for those around you who maybe live right next to you. But for us, it's very much rooted in our faith. There's a very famous story that probably a lot of people have heard from the Bible where there's this idea of a parable where an unlikely person steps in to take care of someone from an area that would have been rejected. And there's this beautiful relationship happening. And it's basically this illustration of what it looks like to neighbor well. And it pushes the boundaries of class and race and all those barriers that may prevent us from being good neighbors. Because often we spend our time with people who are a lot like us.
Right.
We tend to, and which is great that we find people at our kids' schools who are similar to us in their stage of life. And it makes sense we have all these relationships, or we go to community organizations or faith spaces where people believe like us or look like us. And I think the cool thing about neighboring well is it just means everybody you come into contact with. So this can happen at a grocery store. This can happen in your actual neighborhood. And we could have been doing this in Peoria. Funny thing is, I don't know that we were great neighbors in Peoria. We were so consumed with work and parenting and all those things. It almost took leaving that experience to really be intentional about it, but I don't think it has to. But for us, so much about it is listening and noticing needs and not feeling like we have to be the one to meet them, but to honor that they're there. To remind people that they're not alone in it, to establish a relationship so that when they feel comfortable enough, maybe asking for something, something simple like a ride, we don't want to push anything on anyone. So our goal is to listen, to notice, and to be available when the relationship is at a point where it makes sense for us to step in and move to the next level. Can look like Dustin said, look like a cup of coffee, or it can look like deep dives. Neighboring is really, I think anyone can do it. But sometimes we just close our garages and go inside. And this community is actually designed with porches on purpose so that people are kind of forced.
No fences, no garages. Everyone has a porch. And so even structurally, it's inviting people to be visible and be available. And so we notice when people are not doing their normal rhythms, back to the Stars Hollow metaphor, it's like there's this predictability where, the same people are in Luke's diner, so it's like we know people's everyday movements. Like literally there's this one neighbor, Larry, that he walks this one sidewalk 20 times a day. And it's like, if he's not walking that sidewalk, he's either sick or in the hospital. Like it's easy to know, like, wait, where's so-and-so? Or Christina does puzzles every Wednesday night with the same group of people. It's like everyone notices when someone's not gone. Or if Christina has a long work day, there will be people like, what, where are you? Like, it's like, I've been gone for 10 hours. It's just it's a unique setting that we get to both foster and also participate in.
That's so beautiful. I think the key here, what I hear you saying, is awareness. It's being aware of the people around you. And that's something that all of us can do, whether or not we live in a tiny home community. You described having porches on your front, and I'm thinking about my own house. We have a garage that we pull into, and then there's a deck on the back, and I can see my neighbors, but so many of our housing situations have changed too. And kind of the normal housing situations that, you're right, we pull in, don't see our neighbors. We do whatever we're doing in the privacy of our fenced in backyard. But I think listeners can hear themselves even in your very unique situation. You're aware of your neighbor who walks that sidewalk 20 times a day. And I think if we start to open our eyes and pay attention a little bit, we'll notice those patterns in our own neighbors so that we can neighbor well. We can join you in that, in the places that we're living. So that's beautiful. Yeah. Okay, you guys, you talk about, your name, A Faithful Presence. is a beautiful description of what you do every single day. You're showing up, being relational, walking with people, filling in the gaps. How does the gift of presence make a difference?
What do you think?
I was going to let him go first, but I'm the one with the most words. I think the gift of presence it's common. It's received as a gift across all of humanity, right? To have people who will show up, sit with you in it, be available in like a posture of not pushing, not pulling, but just being with. Just being with. I think we do this in families naturally in good family environments, where families are hard, but in a lot of ways we do this as family. We can do this with close friends where you don't have the words to say, you don't have the fixer that's going to make everything better. But showing up and being present and say, I see you. And for us, like many of our neighbors are people of faith. And for us to say, we see God in you, those things matter. Knowing that they have value and worth, that there's nothing performative. There's nothing they have to do to gain, unconditional positive regard and belonging.
Yeah.
And so hoping to create that by just showing up faithfully. And our kids are a big part of that. And so being present as our family and showing up too when we're not our perfect selves, none of us are, not having to perform on that side of things, and letting them watch us parent or fumble through our marriage right in front of them when we miscommunicate. I think that presence means something, to be authentically who you are so people can be authentically who they are.
Yeah. That is a gift, right? Allowing people to be authentically who they are in your presence. That is a gift. I imagine.
This is a bit of
Go ahead.
This is a bit of a side thing that maybe is interesting, maybe it's not. There's a quote that maybe from Bruce Perry that talks about trauma happens when there is a lack of an empathetic witness.
Ooh.
And they've done studies, and so we kind of read it at the intersection of several models, but there was some war in England where there were regular bombings and parents sent their kids off to a distant relative or somewhere where they could be safe from the bombings in the city. And they found out that they tracked these kids' lives, and those that stayed within the city in the danger zone but were with their caregivers had less trauma than those who left their families away from the external dangers, but they didn't have that secure attachment or that stable relational because of the sense of what's happening. And so that is the story of so many of our neighbors, that there's a lot of trauma they've experienced and the lack of people that they could count on in the middle of that. And so it's not just about reducing the trauma, but it's also about including a sense of belonging and people that are, that you can lean on.
Yeah. And the healing that comes from that, I'm sure, is pretty huge.
Yeah.
I imagine that some people listening, I know I experience this sometimes when I watched you make this transition from Illinois to this tiny village, which was fascinating to me. The whole tiny home thing was like so fascinating. Thank you for like showing all of that. I imagine some people listening would look at your lives and from the outside be able to recognize this huge difference that you are making in the community that you're living in. Does it feel huge to you?
That's a good question.
I think it feels huge at a micro level, kind of like you said earlier. It feels huge for certain people, in that we know that what you can do for one, what you wish you could do for everyone. Several people have said that quote over the years. I heard it from Andy's family at one point, but we think of it like that. We cannot make a huge impact for 400 people 2 people and 2 kids. But we can do it for a handful. And I think all of us can, wherever context we're in. We can show up wholly and create spaces of belonging and connection that will be impactful for a few. And that can be huge.
Yeah.
So
that's well said. That's well said. What would you say to listeners who want to make a difference where they are in their community, but they just don't know where to start? And they are likely not going to be the kind of people that are moving across the country into a tiny home surrounded by your neighbors. But where do they start?
We process this a lot, like, how did we get here? And it's, strangely enough, saying yes to this opportunity was the result of a string of other yeses that we didn't even know we were making sometimes. And so it didn't feel that radical because of how our life just kind of led us to here. But I would encourage listeners to just think about their context. Where are they hungering for some kind of difference? How does their unique mixture of personality and context give them a gift to offer to the world? And maybe it's just one friend who is completely different than you are. And it could be someone you find through a nonprofit or someone you just meet randomly. And just don't be afraid to lean in to one yes. And just think of that. Just think of your next yes, not 20, like no one knows 20 steps down the road.
Right. That's so good, Dustin. Before we go, I want to keep going, but I'm trying to keep this manageable for people to listen to. I feel like I could talk to you for hours. Before we go, if people like me are like, wait, I don't want this to end, how do I learn more about what you're doing with A Faithful Presence? I want to know more about this community first village, or they want to follow you on social media. Where can they find you online?
Yeah, so we're on Instagram. That's where we like to hang out the most. It's A Faithful Presence is the handle. We share little snippets of our life. It looks pretty regular. And then, Community First Village. It's getting national attention now. So if you go to is it MLF.org, you can see kind of like what the community is designed like, how it started, things like that. You can also sign up for our newsletter. If you go to our Instagram page, it's there. Or you could reach out directly if you wanted to start a conversation. Our email is hello@afaithfulpresence.org. We'd love to connect with you and just talk to you about how our life might be able to help you figure out whatever you're doing in your context.
Yeah, totally.
That's awesome. Dustin and Christina, thank you so much for being with us today, for sharing this part of your story. I think that you two are beautiful examples of human kindness at work, and I'm really proud to be your friend.
Oh, we're honored to be in your community too.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Human Kindness at Work. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe. It really helps get the word out so that more people can be inspired to make a difference right where they are. Until next time, look for ways that human kindness is at work around you. And don't just notice, be a part of it. See you next time.